Hey everyone, welcome back to Big Strong Book. I am Reed, and today I'm reviewing The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. So this novel was published in 1962, a few years before Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep was published in 1968. And this novel marked a turning point in particular for Philip K. Dick. So previously in the 1950s, Dick's novels could be characterized as more science fiction pulp. They're pulp fiction. I haven't read his novels from the 50s. That's just kind of what I've heard. Is that his later novels are very, very much so filled with ideas. His earlier novels, maybe not so much, but I haven't read them for myself yet. Um, and this novel was also the first in his career that really got him critical acclaim. He won the Hugo Award for Best Novel, which is one of the most prestigious novel or awards, excuse me, that you can win as an author. And so this is kind of when his novels really took that. Uh, it was really a turning point for his bibliography up to this point. Um, I'm going to try to keep this review much shorter than normal. That's just because I've been having issues with the phone here. It keeps randomly freezing, and it'll just brick the camera. I'm not able to tap into the phone, so I have to force restart it. So it could freeze as I'm doing this. I hope it doesn't, but it's just when it freezes, I lose all video. I tried to film this before. That I was able to film for 12 minutes before it just bricked. So hopefully that doesn't happen here. So I'm going to try to keep this review hopefully under 20 minutes. So anyway, this novel, The Man in the High Castle, I'm sure you have heard of the Amazon TV show that adapted this book, kind of a loose adaptation. It went on for about 4 or 5 seasons. I have seen a little bit of the show, only a couple episodes, but many, many years ago. Um, and so this novel is set in an alternate history when the Axis powers have won World War II, Japan, Germany, Italy, and the United States looks completely different because the Axis powers won. So the Nazis control kind of most of the East Coast through the Midwest that is still considered the United States, but it's under Nazi control. In the middle of the country, the Rocky Mountain states, it's called the Rocky Mountain States, that region of the US. Along the West Coast is the Pacific states, and that is controlled by Japan. And then the South, the southern United States, that's more a Nazi puppet regime. So that is kind of as we jump into things as we see what is starting to occur. That's where this world is, but it's also a world where significant scientific developments have happened. The Nazis have continued their work with the V2 rockets and rocket science in general to the point where when this novel takes place in the early 60s, they have already sent men have already landed on the moon, men have already landed on Mars, and rocket travel is one of the big ways to get for international travel to get from place to place because you can get from one side of the globe to the other in an hour and a half, really, really fast. But perhaps more drastically, what has been done since the Axis powers have took over is like continents and countries. Africa, all the countries within Africa have been practically decimated. A lot of the characters think back to the genocide of sorts that has happened within Africa. And almost all Jewish people in the world have been killed. The few Jews that are left are by necessity they're forced to live in hiding, or at least live under assumed identities. And in the U.S., slavery is legal once again. So that sets the scene for this novel. Um, so I wasn't the biggest fan of this book. Um, I feel like it is one similar to Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. It is a novel that I believe will improve upon a reread. But it left me significantly wanting more. And I feel like one of my big complaints um, with this book was that it it didn't it was a little too big for its britches. I'll just kind of put it that way. I'm gonna see if this works right now. I'm gonna stop this video and start another one just in case it will save into smaller chunks, and I'll try to edit these together. All right. So as I mentioned before, I feel like this book is a little too big for its britches, and what I mean by that is this novel is relatively short. It's about 275 pages, and we have five or six point of view characters within this novel. That is a lot for a novel of this size. I'm not sure that if Dick did what he did in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, kept it to two point of views, if it would have been more focused plot wise and character development wise. Because when you really open up the scope of this story, but you only have 275 pages to tell it in, it definitely leaves the reader wanting more. And Dick spent a lot of time within these storylines exploring things that I didn't feel were altogether necessary for the story. So, one of the big things within this world, and it involves a couple characters, is particularly Japanese nationals and people traveling to America have a fascination with Americana, or not necessarily antiques, but collectibles of pieces of American culture. This American culture that is the American culture as we understand it from the 1800s, from the early 1900s, is dying because, we really have America what is left of America is truly a melting pot, because you have the Japanese Empire and you have Nazi Germany, and that really, constricts any cultural presence that the America of before World War II has on the America after World War II in this novel. So one of the main characters, his name is Robert Childen. He's the first one introduced, and he runs this collectibles shop. But we learn that they aren't collectibles, at least not in their true form. For people coming in to buy these items, they are collectibles, but Childen gets them delivered to him by a manufacturer. There is a corporation that manufactures so-called collectible rare items. And he knows this, and he's involved within this trade. And again, I'm not sure what to make of his story in particular. And there's another character, Frank. His real name is Frank Fink, but he goes by Frank Frink. He is a Jew who is living, and his assumed name is Frink rather than his given last name of Fink. And Frank Frink, I'll just refer to him as that because he calls himself that almost the entire book, or Frank. So he's a worker for this corporation that makes these items of Americana. And at the beginning of the novel, he quits. He's kind of fed up with it, and he with one of his coworkers, Ed McCarthy, he begins this trade of selling so-called jewelry that's kind of jewelry but not really, but they made it really cheaply and easily, um, to essentially to sell to children so he could sell it in his store. So those are two characters kind of revolving around the same plot line. Then there is intrigue with the Japanese presence within the Pacific states. There is a character, Tagomi, Mr. Tagomi. He is the head of a trade association, I believe, for the Japanese states, but he has an office in San Francisco. And he's going to meet a Swiss man, or who he thinks is Swiss, named Mr. Balins. And Balins comes by rocket to San Francisco, but of course, Balins is actually, I mean, I'll get into spoilers here with the plot. This is pretty much spoilers, but Balins is actually Wegner, I think that's his last name. He's really an agent for a small sect of the Nazi party that is against the ruling factions, and he comes to the Pacific states to warn Tagomi of what is called Operation Dandelion, or this plan essentially for the Nazi government to invade the Rocky Mountains, but then after the pretense of invading the Rocky Mountains, essentially annihilate the Japanese Empire through hydrogen bombs. So he's going to warn the Japanese government about this, because he is, he's pretty much a Nazi, but he and his colleagues believe that this would be a drastic, because this would push the world into World War III. So that's another, like, a couple characters around that plot line. And then there is a character named Juliana. She lives in the Rocky Mountain states. She lives in Colorado, and she is Frank. She is his ex-wife, and her storyline revolves around this book that has been written within this world, and the book is called "The Grasshopper Lies Heavy," and I'll get into that here in a little bit. So, "The Grasshopper Lies Heavy" is a book within a book, and within the Grasshopper book that the characters in this world read, it is an alternate history from their perspective if the Allies had won World War II. Of course, it's not completely parallel to our own history. FDR is voted out of office in 1940. There's another fake not a real person in the Democratic Party named Tubman, but another Democrat becomes president in 1940 and leads the country into World War I. And in this book, the civil rights issue is pretty much solved in the 50s. The civil rights issue in America, that's solved about a decade before it's actually solved in real life. And interestingly enough, of course, civil rights wasn't, at least the Civil Rights Act, of course, civil rights is not solved in present day America, but the Civil Rights Act, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, those figures and those moments happened a decade earlier within the alternate reality of the alternate reality. So it's a book that is banned, and a lot of characters are intrigued by it. A lot of characters are intrigued by it. But again, you have these 3 plot circles, and with about 5 or 6 major POVs, in 2 in the first 2 spheres, and then Juliana as the 5th main one in the 3rd. And again, I really think the plot of this novel is something that is really stretched. Not necessarily stretched thin. It's just, I feel like this might have been better had we really gotten some time to know these characters. And one of the things that I appreciated about this is that Philip K. Dick really takes his time to explore the religious side of some of the things going on in this world. So, the major influential religious text in this alternate reality is a Taoist text called the I Ching, I believe is how it's pronounced, where essentially you toss three coins 6 times, and each way that the coins are tossed corresponds to different lines, and those 6 lines create a hexagram, essentially an oracle for your day. You ask the I Ching a question, and you toss the coins, and it gives you a hexagram as kind of a poetic answer to be interpreted how you want to interpret it. So a lot of characters utilize the I Ching to try to figure out how to live their lives and how to go about navigating these scenarios. And that's something that's very fascinating. Um, but I think it's the discussion of that is undercut by the moments of um, discussions of Americana and art, especially with the children's storylines in the Frank's plot line. That is by far the weakest of the book to me. Tagomi, and Balin's and Juliana, those are the probably the most interesting plot lines. Um, Especially because the author of this alternate text, The Grasshopper Lies Heavy, he's known as the man, he is the eponymous man in the high castle, and Juliana's storyline revolves around her wanting to meet him. But she gets involved with a guy who is somewhat of a secret Nazi agent who is sent to try to assassinate this Abinson, the author of The Grasshopper Lies Heavy, and she's with him and trying to go visit the author. But it's hard for me to talk about this book, and I'll admit that, because I don't know necessarily if it's I didn't give this novel enough time to really sink in. I finished this novel yesterday, um, but I just the metaphysical, philosophical, and religious themes and discussion points that Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep brought up. Um, I just didn't get with this novel. Um, I mean, I understood where they kind of were, but they didn't hit as hard as Deckard and Isidore and Mercerism and the Buster Friendly Show and the androids. This was, I mean, characters horrified of the reality that they live in, and they're trying to break free, but they can't really break free. And maybe that's the point that Dick is trying to make. I mean, I realized this with rereading Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and I realized this by reading The Man in the High Castle now, but I feel like I need to take notes I never take notes when I read. I hated taking notes while reading in high school and college. I hated having to annotate texts. So I don't do that, at least on first read throughs. But I think that The Man in the High Castle is a book that would improve for me upon a reread, but again, I'm not sure. And unfortunately, that means that I don't have a lot to say about it because I think this book is ultimately lost on me. I appreciated some of the discussions of the I Ching. That was something I had never heard of that Taoist text before. It's fascinating kind of diving in and doing other research about that. The idea of, so when Juliana meets the man in the high castle, he reveals to her that he did, he used the I Ching, the oracle, to write the book, which means if the oracle tells the truth and the book is the truth, does that mean that the Allies actually won in an alternate reality? So she kind of becomes aware of that at the way end of the book. And the book improves, especially in the last 70 pages. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure, especially with the Childen and the Frank storylines, that's where this novel really loses me. Um, I think, but again, I think it's a novel that will improve upon a reread. Um, I don't, so I'm going to conclude here just because I don't know if my phone is going to freeze again. Um, so let me know what you think of The Man in the High Castle, if it's something you like, don't like, and I will see you guys next time for the next book review.